that I think we need to understand, and you need to understand, and I don't know that Mary Ann really touched on this very strongly, although I think she did some, is that the federal standards are actually lower standards than those of Massachusetts. Massachusetts adopted the Ed Reform Act back in 1992, and since that time we have developed standards that are arguably the best in the nation, and we compete very highly on a national level. Our Massachusetts students do. The Common Core federal standards are actually lower than what our standards are. So, and not to mention that we also spent millions of dollars developing those high standards. I mean, we spent a lot of money developing those standards. If you go to the Pioneer Institute, Jamie Gass is over there. He's got a lot of information up there on Common Core and how our students have performed over the years. Sandra Stotsky is one of the speakers that's going to be out in the Tewksbury, Fall River. She's going to be out there. She's been speaking throughout the state at various forums. We held a forum back in May, and Sandra Stotsky came and spoke about it, as well as another fellow from down around Washington talking about the costs. But the real issue here is we've already spent a lot of money, and now we're going to spend a lot more money for lower standards, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is just the most ridiculous thing that we've ever seen. And so that's the message I think we need to pound home to our legislators and to the Board of Education. We want local control, and we want superior standards in Massachusetts. We don't want to give up our standards in Massachusetts. They're too good. Some of the things that they do, take English language arts for example. Most English language arts programs or curriculums within school districts have literature, okay, classic literature. Huck Finn, I can't think of some of the other ones, but Huck Finn comes to mind. The federal standards are actually going to require school districts to have half of the literature that they read be non-fiction. Okay? So now what you're going to be doing is you're going to be getting like EPA reports on global warming or some other such thing, or maybe a Federal Reserve bulletin on, you know, how great the minimum wage is. And you'll be reading that in English language arts and we're going to throw out Huck Finn and some of the other classics that we read these days. So it's a real tragedy. And another example that I would bring to your attention is actually occurring up in Reading. And it's kind of interesting because when you first hear this, the federal standards require all students to have Algebra 1 by 9th grade. And to all of us here, we think, oh, well, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, it's actually problematic for kids that actually want to get into, say, chemistry in college, because what do they have to do? They have to have calculus by the time they graduate from high school. If they don't have Algebra 1 by the time they're in 8th grade, they're going to be behind the 8 ball and they'll never hit the mark. And so there's parents out in Reading that their son wants to be a chemist, just like his dad. He wants to be a chemist just like his dad. But he can't get Algebra 1 until the 9th grade because of the federal standards. And this is a ridiculous stuff. Again, we're losing local control. Reading is basically saying we have to do this because the state is telling us that this is what we have to do and we have no choice in the matter. Local control. That's the key issue. Local control, and we already have superior standards. We don't need to dumb down our standards. So what can you do? Once again, Tantascwa in 2012 upped the ante again, and we adopted another resolution opposing the Common Core and asking our legislators once again to submit legislation. So the bill number, if you want to know, and you want to communicate with your legislature, and actually there's a copy of the bill over here on the table. It's House Bill 496. House Bill 496. It was actually It was actually sponsored by Republican Representative Todd Smollett, who was down in our area. And it was also, believe it or not, Senator Stephen Brewer signed on to it as well, because he just happens to be my senator. Hopefully not for much longer, but in any event, House Bill 496 would pull us out of the Common Core, okay, or at least it would start us down that road. So House Bill 496, write your representatives or senators and ask them to support that particular bill. And you know, Mary Ann talked about getting in touch with your school committee members. I have sort of genericized the resolution that Tantascwa adopted to pull us out of the Common Core, so that any school committee in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts can adopt this resolution. And again, there's copies of the resolution down there on the table if you'd like to take that home to your local school committees and find out who your school committee members are. How many people know who their school committee members are here? Raise your hand.
I live in the city of Boston, so I don't get to elect them.
You don't get to elect them, but you still need to know who they are.
You elect the person who appoints them.
The mayor. But
well, then we're too late. Although he's on record as supporting charter schools, so the Boston Teachers Union did not endorse it.
Ah, that's interesting. That's interesting. You need to know who your school committee members are, and you need to get this document in front of them and ask them to adopt it, because, and the purpose of that is, in speaking with Representative Smola, who submitted it for us, we submitted legislation in 2010 and it died. It didn't go anywhere. Why? Tantascwa was the only school district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that endorsed that piece of legislation. So what we're now trying to do is get more school committees to adopt this resolution and get behind this piece of legislation, so that there'll be some impetus on the legislature side of things to do something about this. Question?
I had an observation, and this comes from the last presentation at a Tea Party meeting on Common Core, which is, I think there's an Achilles heel it has. Because it has all these corporate tie-ins and enlisted all this corporate support from the educational industrial complex, as it were. In fact, if you actually follow the Common Core provisions, if you actually have to go with the whole program, completely busts out any school district's budget. And although this is one of the reasons why you're getting school superintendents on your side, because they don't know how the hell they're going to pay for it, and they don't, you know, they know they're going to have a collision with the taxpayer at some point, and it's not going to be paying for teachers. It's going to be paying for a lot of stuff.
That's a really excellent point, and that's the thing that you go to your school committee with, and it is a budget buster. Tantascwa has had to start its curriculum in a school district is on a cycle, generally about 5 or 7 year cycles. Okay, they'll go through a cycle, and then, you know, you get through the end of the 7th year, and then you start developing, you know, you start updating your curriculum so that it's matching, keeping up with the times, so to speak. We have actually had to start our math frameworks early, because Common Core federal standards. We had to start about a year or two early. And that, of course, is costing staff time, teacher time, all kinds of time that we're not getting from anywhere except, you know, the taxpayer. So that's a really big issue. Even bigger than that is the PARCC testing, which Mary Ann alluded to very briefly. The PARCC testing is going to require students to take assessments online with a computer. All right. So I asked my superintendent at a school committee meeting. I said, "So, are we going to have the computer capabilities to do this?" And they assured me in the school committee meeting, you know, public meeting, "Oh yeah, we're going to be fine with this. We're going to be fine because we're field testing it." And so I want to know, well, you know, we're going to be okay. Oh, we're going to be fine. So I called up the superintendent after the meeting was over a couple of days later, and I said, "We really are okay? How many computers do we have?" "Well, we have a computer lab." "Well, okay, how many computers are in the computer lab?" "Well, there are 30 computers in the computer lab." 30 computers in the computer lab, and how many students do we have in the building? We have over 1,000 students in the building, and we're going to cycle these students through those 30 computers to take these tests. How long is that going to take? Well, we're not really too sure, and all that. You know, this is going to be a budget buster. And one of the things that the park testing is actually doing is it's starting to focus people's attention on what kind of a budget buster this is really going to be. So at the Massachusetts Association of School Committees annual meeting back in November, which Agatha and Mary Ann and this whole crew over here were out there protesting the Common Core. They got on the, was it the front page of the Cape Cod Times? That's right. That's right. I went over and visited them and said hello and all that sort of fun stuff. But the Massachusetts Association of School Committees actually adopted a resolution asking the Board of Education to delay the implementation of the park testing so that we could get, we could get the resources available to us. There was also an amendment that was offered, and it actually was adopted, speaking to your point about whether or not this is an unfunded mandate. And if it's an unfunded mandate, for those of you who are familiar with Proposition 2.5, if it gets determined that it actually is an unfunded mandate, guess what? We don't have to do it. That's the big thing about the park testing.
Well, that will be the next move, okay? And it's been done before to try and water down 2.5. They'll try and require it to slip underneath 2.5 so that the communities will be required to spend the money, and required to raise the taxes, period.
That's right. But I guess the point is that any little cut, any little slit that we can put in this thing, the better off we're all going to be. It's another speaking point for us to walk around. It's just going to be, a budget busters, and superintendents around the clock are very afraid of what's going on because they are already loaded down with such an administrative burden that there are actually bills in front of the legislature now asking for a special commission to review all the regulatory paperwork that they have to do because they're just buried by this stuff. So the Mass Association of School Committees actually asked the Board of Education to delay the park testing, and actually the Board of Education listened, and they did. They put it off until 2015. So we were successful on that front. So some of our efforts are having an impact. Again, contact your school committee members and your legislators. Okay, it's House Bill 496. That's what you contact your legislators. Ask them to support that bill. Go to your school committee members and ask them to adopt our resolution, or at least start the discussion at the school committee level of what are they doing about Common Core? Is it going to be budget busters? That sort of thing. And ask them to start supporting the elimination of the Common Core. That's all I really have to say, so if there's any questions or whatever.
Yeah, thank you. Have you had any pushback at Tasco from, higher levels in the state about your position?
We have heard rumblings that our superintendent has been talked to, but we haven't, no. The school committee is the school committee, and we're not going to change our minds. We're pretty. I mean, 2 times in a row that resolution was adopted unanimously. So the school committee is 100% behind getting rid of the Common Core. So we really haven't seen much of any.
And then for Mary Ann, when I went on the website of the governor's group, it looked like this has been adopted by all but maybe 6 states, Texas and four states. So it's kind of a, where do we stand? It's kind of a late pushback.
No, well.
Several of these states are reconsidering.
So they were told that if they wanted to compete for Race to the Top money and be eligible for No Child Left Behind waivers, they would adopt this.
Okay.
And so they all said, sure.
Okay.
Whatever for the money, right? Whatever for the money. It doesn't matter what the kids, what happens to the kids, we don't care. We just want the money.
As a matter of fact,
Which is our own money.
with Massachusetts, when we went for Race to the Top funds in 2010, I don't know if any of you recall this, but we actually submitted 2 applications. The first one was rejected by the Federal Department of Education. It was rejected. So we went back to the drawing board and we submitted another application. And there was only one difference between the first application and the second application. Guess what it was?
We lowered our standards.
Well, yes, we checked the box. What box did we check? We checked the Common Core Federal Standard box. We said that we would adopt them. And that was the only difference
So it's like
between the
getting
2
on a
applications.
bandwagon of debt.
And so it was basically, here's the money, do you want it? Okay, you're going to have to pony up. And then there's the waivers that Mary Ann talked about. There has been pushback from a handful of the states, Indiana, Georgia, I think Utah, and several others have really started to push back, and they're delaying things and they're saying, wait a minute, we have to slow this federal standard train down. And so I think there is some pushback. And the handout that Mary Ann and those folks put together, this handout right here has got some really great resources. Some of the senators and representatives that have been at the forefront. I would also mention to you that actually the Republican National Committee actually adopted a resolution rejecting the Common Core as being one of the things. It's an amazing thing, actually. I don't know if we posted it on.
That will annoy a number of prominent Republicans, some who are former governors,
Indeed,
if not current.
That's right. So, the question's over here.
I have a statement. I'm totally against the MCAS testing. I've been a certified teacher since 1973. I have a learning center now. I've worked in public and private schools. I'm a selectman and board. And I think if you're talking about local control, we need to go back to local control. I was on the school committee, and I was on the curriculum subcommittee, and we had local control then in the 90s.
Yeah.
Having the MCAS and doing what the state wants us to do is not local control.
Yeah.
So I would say go back to MCAS for failing cities only, like Chelsea. You know, I remember at the time when they did the ed reform, it's because some cities were failing. Well, why punish the whole state because you have 1 or 2 cities who are failing? Make them go according to the
You bring up a very interesting point, and I've been struggling because I was on the bandwagon with MCAS for a while because I believe in standards. I believe that we need to hold those standards high. I believe in that. Unfortunately, we don't have as much control. The local school committee does not have control over those standards. They're basically handed down to us by what amounts to unelected, unaccountable subcommittees of the Board of Education.
However, a substantial amount of the establishment in the state, particularly liberal, but some Republican, are behind that. And
That's right.
They're going to get on your side on Common Core precisely because they see it as a threat to MCAS.
That's right. That's right. But speaking to your point, however, I would say that, the whole Ed Reform Act has its whole story all behind it, all by itself, in the way in which, there was a funding issue, there was a court case that was pending, McDuffie v. Secretary of Education, and there were a whole bunch of other things that kind of came together at the same time. They wanted to raise the standards and implement the testing, but the teachers union, I believe, was kind of saying, well, no, not unless we get more money. And the legislature said, well, we're not going to give you more money unless we have the testing. And so the bargain was struck, and that's what we got. But I'm not convinced that the MCAS is a great thing any longer. I used to think it is, but I'm not as convinced of that
It's
anymore.
not even objective.
No.
And it's not transparent, that's
And it's
for
not
sure.
transparent. It's not transparent because the local school committees are not developing their own curriculum and controlling it.
And if we can continue on this for 1 minute, get back to the scientific portion of it. If you have to teach to a test, and that's what the complaint has been for years, those kids are just getting taught to the test, then what are they learning? What are the children learning? If kids know how to add, subtract, read, write, spell, etc., they don't have to be taught to any test. They can take any test and pass it and do well. There's something wrong with those tests. And by letting them not be transparent, we've done a great injustice to the kids of this state.
Well, what's actually interesting
But-
is that Massachusetts students actually do fare very well internationally, which is
But you're
something
talking
to be
UNESCO.
spoken of.
But you're talking UNESCO,
Well-
and you're talking who's in charge of the international education system. They're not the ones who went to the moon.
Yeah.
We're the ones.
Yes, but I've encountered this phenomenon. I encounter it by teachers telling me stories. I know a few teachers, and I've done a few examples. And it goes like this. Teachers teaching a boy in the 8th grade, and parents come in for the teacher conference. And the teacher has to say, I'm sorry, your son is not ready for college. He is not reading at a 8th grade level. He's not even reading at a 6th grade level. He doesn't have the adequate math. And then the parents say to the teacher, but he's been getting A's. They've been doing how fine he's been doing.
Yeah.
When you have an essentially bureaucratic factory system, such as our public education system, it's like the Soviet Union. If you don't do something, well, they'll pretend to teach and other people will pretend to learn. You have the MCAS so that you don't turn out automobiles without engines in them.
Okay.
And so I think it seems to me, in the context of the current public school system, MCAS might be a necessary evil.
Yeah.
There's certainly better ways to educate.
So there's a question here, and then there's another question over here. So, Steve?
So I was just going to ask, might not be a question for this point in time, but in the Republican state platform, we do mention education, and I wonder if that's something that we should push for in the coming platform we have going forward is in opposition to federal intervention in our school system.
Absolutely, that's a great idea, and it just so happens that I'm also a state committeeman for the Republican Party, so and I'm actually sitting on the platform committee, so I would actually be happy to bring that forward.
When does the